Welcome back, dreamers. Your host Ken here with some exciting news that I just couldn't wait to share. Somewhere in Dreamland now has an amazing new merch store filled with custom Somewhere in Dreamland hoodies, t-shirts, coffee mugs, pint glasses, and much, much more. So what are you waiting for? Why not hop on over to dreamlandpodcast.weebly.com and grab yourself or someone else some custom Dreamland gear now.
Danser avec moi. Du cordonnier, du fêteur, qu'est-ce que t'as donc dans la tête? C'est que moi.
Welcome back, dreamers. Joining the show once again is legend tripper, storyteller, and man of mysterious disappearances, Steve Stockton. Tonight, Steve and I discuss his newest book, some of his own personal experiences, and even a few tales that he's collected throughout his research into the strange and mysterious. So without further ado, grab your blankets, turn down the lights, get comfy, and let's fade away into
Dreamland.
All right, Steve. Well, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks. How you, Mark?
I'm not too bad. It's been a while since we've talked, and I'm kind of excited because I believe that you've dropped 2 books since then.
Yeah, National Park Mysteries and Disappearances Volume 2 and 3 are out now. They're all doing well.
That's good. Yeah, I got to read 2. I haven't got to read 3 yet, but I actually have it in my queue, so I'm excited.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about it because your first 2 books were... They're great, man. I love a good mystery, and I think the way that you write really tells the story really well. Like, I love that you pretty much just go right into whatever facts are out there or whatever the legends say. I like both ways. You kind of give both sides of things.
Yeah, I'm more of a researcher and a legend tripper than I am an actual investigator, so that's just the easiest way to dive into it. It's just a legend and talk to people that know about it or that may have experienced or know somebody that did. Seems to be more prevalent in the South. The first volume of that, which dealt with the Great Smokies, there's a lot more woo stories in there, a lot more spooky stuff, but got something in everything. All 3 volumes. Volume 2 was California, covering Yosemite, Joshua Tree, and not Crater Lake. I can't think of the other place right now.
Mount Shasta, wasn't it?
Yeah, Mount Shasta. Sorry, it's early Sunday here, and I'm still on my first cup of coffee.
Oh, no.
And, volume 3 is Pacific Northwest with Oregon, Washington State, and Idaho. So kind of working my way back east, I think. I'm going to go up in the Great Lakes area next and probably dip down into the Southwest. May flip that around, but I'm headed east and eventually try to cover as many places as I can.
Awesome. When you get out this way, I'll be really excited to read that because there's some crazy stuff down here. Actually, in the East Coast in general is really strange. And I grew up near the Great Lakes, and that area up there is just wild too.
Yeah, a lot of stuff there. Ohio is one of the strangest states out there. There's a lot of stuff in the New England area too. And yeah, like you said, down the eastern seaboard there, really from Cape May, New Jersey, all the way down. There's all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, hey, why don't we touch on a few things in California and then we'll move on to the latest edition in the book. 'Cause I'm kind of interested to hear some things in that to get me excited about reading this book, because I'm almost there. I'm about 70 pages from getting to read it. So
Yeah. It sounds good.
I know California, there are just some weird things out in California, you know, like I think you have in Mount Shasta, isn't that where people claim to see the Watchers and things like that?
Yeah. Yeah. There's all kinds of things there. Ascended Masters, UFOs, Bigfoot, Lemurians. There's some kind of weird vortex or something there that draws all this stuff in, and then it draws all the people there looking for that sort of thing. You'll have some kind of experience if you go to Mount Shasta, even if it's just with some of the other people that are there, the searchers prowling around in the woods.
Yeah, there's plenty of woods there too, aren't there?
But yeah, it's up above the tree line, it's pretty desolate and snow covered. But yeah, down below that, there's lots and lots of old growth timber.
Let's talk about Joshua Tree for a minute, because Joshua Tree, to me, I've never actually been there myself, but from everything that I read, I know there's some really strange things that happen there, but it more and less seems like some people see it as like a spiritual type place. Is that right?
It can be. One of the guys from the Eagles, the rock band, said that Joshua Tree was everybody's power spot. And that was the big thing back in the 70s. A lot of those bands would go out there, and of course they had some help from mushrooms and things like that, but they go out there and watch for UFOs. But Graham Parsons of Flying Burrito Brothers and then out on his own, he famously died at Joshua Tree, at the Joshua Tree Inn in room number 8. I've got a whole chapter in the book about my experience there in that room. But strange thing about that, he had made a pact with his road manager that whichever one of them died first would give the other a Viking-style send-off. So after he passed away, his road manager and another guy stole the body off the tarmac at LAX in a borrowed hearse, took the coffin out to Joshua Tree, 5 gallons of gas and a match, and poof, released Graham out into the space there. So just stuff like that. I mean, there's just all kinds of weird stuff out there. My partner on my YouTube channel, Bill Melder, he lived in California for a while. He got lost in Joshua Tree and wandered around out there for 5 days. His story's in the book too. He encountered what to me sounds like gray aliens. That's the description he gave of them. That's what it sounds like. But they would like come up and look at him and then run away. And he literally thought he was going to die. He had picked a spot next to a rock there and kind of burrowed in a little bit and just laid down to die eventually. And then they found him. But it's an interesting story. I wouldn't want to get lost in there, that's for sure.
Because it gets super hot there in the summertime, and then during the day, and then at night it gets really cool too, doesn't it?
Yeah, you can get heat stroke during the day and then hypothermia in the evening because it gets so cold. There's nothing out in the desert to hold that heat in. I lived in Nevada for about 7 years, and desert's a place you don't want to mess around with unless you got plenty of water and more clothes or something to put on, something in case you do get cold, because it can be brutal heat and brutal cold.
There's another guy in your book, Paul Miller, is that right? He was disappeared, and then they found him in a hole too, or something like that, right?
Yeah, they thought he'd kind of dug himself out a spot there, kind of like what Bill was doing, just either from the heat or from the cold to try to get away from the elements. But yeah, they found him. It took a while. I think he was missing for over a year before they found the body. I'd have to double check on that.
Wow. It's crazy. There's some really good stories in this book. There's another one in your book. There's another one, another Bill. Bill, how do you say his last name? Wasco?
Yeah, Wasco. He went missing out there too.
It's a wonder that more people don't go missing out there, because like my brother-in-law, he's an adventurer, a hiker, and he likes to do it all by himself. Like, he doesn't want anybody around when he goes out. He wants to have his own thing, but I think that's kind of dangerous too.
Yeah. I would caution against it. Go with a group, stay with the group. because that happens a lot, even when people do go out with a group, if they get separated or decide to, like you said, split off and do their own thing. That's usually when people go missing. And sometimes it'll be something simple like, oh, I forgot so and so. I'm going to go back to the car and get it. Never see him again. So it makes you wonder: is there's something out there taking people? There's all kinds of theories, from Bigfoot to aliens to portals to serial killers, and it's hard to pin it on just any one particular thing. I think maybe it's a mix of all the above.
I think for the most part, a lot of that stuff's connected in one way or another anyhow. So maybe it's, yeah, like you said, not just one certain thing, but if you were to go with a theory right now, because I know theories change and I know how you think, Steve. I kind of think the same way. Like you get on one thing and then something else interests you. It's kind of like, I don't know, what do you want to call it? Legend ADD, or, like I get that way too. I'm like, oh, this is the way this is. And then something else comes along and I'm like, oh, wait, this is really cool too.
Yeah. It's kind of like peeling an onion. That's a analogy that Cisco Murdoch came up with, where, what's under that layer? Well, it's more onion, and you just keep going. So it's just a big paranormal onion. And I found, just over years and years and years of looking into this, there's more questions than there are answers. But now, that's the pursuit. Now I'm looking for the next set of questions, and there's so many rabbit holes to go down out there. Like you said, and you can change things up. You can read one account and, yeah, that perfectly fits this, but then you read something else like, yeah, that's actually this. One of the most intriguing theories I've heard lately is the Fae theory. That if you look back in the Celtic religion, or the Celtic folklore of the fairies, it was almost a religion at one time, particularly in Ireland. A lot of these things are rooted in stories of the Fae and that folklore. There's stories going back to like 1700s where people there talked about little men that came from the sky in a horseless buggy. Well, to me, that's a UFO. They talked about how they're in the different levels of the Fae. Some of the creatures were big and hairy. Well, that's a Bigfoot. So it all kind of falls under the heading of the Fae, is the most popular theory that I've heard recently. And again, those legends persist. I mean, the Native Americans, a lot of what they believe in also coincides with legends of the Fae, the little people. Famously, the Cherokee acknowledge the little people, and talked at one time they were at war with them, and then they kind of have a truce now, but they leave each other alone. But they considered them another race of people. They were about 2.5 to 3 feet tall. So is it fairies? Is it aliens? Who knows? But it's still fun to think about, and fun to research.
That is one of my favorite theories as well. I know I talked to like Joshua Cutchin, who's deep into that theory. I wasn't subscribing to this theory before I spoke with him, actually. And then when I spoke to him, I'm like, this makes a lot of sense, really. And it goes back, you can trace it all the way back. I mean, they call them different things, like you said, but really it's the same phenomena, even right down to fairy rings, right? Or fairy circles. I mean, yep. That's a crop circle, really. It's what we call it now, right?
Yeah, it all fits within that framework. And that was the amazing thing to me once I started looking into it. And a really good friend of mine, Gemma Jade, who writes a lot of stuff for Missing Persons and Mysteries, my YouTube channel, she wrote a book called Missing: The Fae Theory. And just, it ties everything up so nice in a neat little bundle with a bow on it that you can all, like you said, trace it back throughout time to where it all falls under that same framework. And, I've had people that, fairies, you're being silly, but same people believe in aliens and Bigfoot. So who's to say? I think there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't know about, and a lot of stuff that we don't understand. And I had a thing on Facebook that somebody shared with me the other day talking about the visible light spectrum and the sound spectrum, and just the very small part of that we're able to perceive. And there's this whole other spectrum on both ends of things we can't see or hear going on around us all the time. So who knows what's out there?
Yeah, and maybe we're not meant to fully understand it either, you know?
Yeah, now that's a possibility too, that maybe at a certain time, a certain place, then more will be revealed.
And you know, what fun would it be if we did, right? Because then we wouldn't have all these mysteries and we wouldn't be talking about this and there'd be nothing left.
I'm the same way. I prefer finding more questions, new questions, than I would the answers. If we had all the answers to ghosts or UFOs or Bigfoot or fairies or any of that, it wouldn't be any fun anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, I always tell my wife, you know, this makes me feel young to do this, because you remember when you were young and everything was a mystery and everything was exciting and everything was, you know, brand new. That's kind of how this field is for me. Everything, even though sometimes it gets redundant in certain aspects of the field, there's still something then comes along and it makes it fresh and new again, you know?
Yeah, and I was the same way. I'm a child of the 60s. I was born in 63. So late 60s, early 70s, there wasn't that much information out there. You had some stuff in search of. You had Fate magazine, you had Frank Edwards, which his books are near and dear to my heart. But there wasn't a lot out there. And now there's so much information, so many books, so many TV shows. And it seems like, the signal is boosting. Now, unfortunately, you have a lot of toxicity in some of the communities. In particular, I found the UFO community and the Bigfoot community to be the worst. And I don't know what that is. I think, if everybody just worked together for a common goal, and I don't know. I can't understand that type of personality that goes in looking to discredit everybody else or claim that this is the only answer. I think there's a lot of different answers and even more questions.
And you know, someone once told me there are professionals in this field, but there are really no experts, because how can you be an expert on something you don't have the answers for, you know? And to say that you only have, or that this answer can only be the only answer, just is not true, because you don't know.
Yeah, and I've had people try to call me an expert. I'm not an expert in anything except eating or something like that. But yeah, that's a red flag to me if somebody claims they're an expert in anything regarding the paranormal. Like you said, how can you be an expert in something that we can't even prove exists? If an expert, to me, that's somebody that's scientific and peer reviewed and has DNA or some sort of stuff like that to back them up. Whereas all this, or the majority of it, it's just a lot of conjecture and theory. But again, that's what I like. I wouldn't want to know rock solid answers, because I don't technically believe there are any, because it changes. It seems to be very fluid. When something will happen and you think you've got it figured out, then it will change. And I don't know if it's so much that I have an interest in the paranormal or the paranormal had an interest in me, because I started noticing all this at a very young age, like around 4 years old. Saw my first full-bodied apparition when I was between 5 and 6. And it didn't scare me at all. It was just like, what's that? That's not supposed to happen. And just kind of went from there. Of course, my grandmother grew up in Appalachia. She called herself a gypsy witch. Now, I don't know where the gypsy part came in. Somewhere way back, that side of the family has roots in Romania. But she's more of what they call a granny witch now, or a kitchen witch. But she knew every legend, every superstition, every little bit of folklore and everything. And that really gave me keen interest in all of it, because I was the only one of the multitude of grandkids. She had 10 children, 9 boys, and my mother being the only girl. So there was always a lot of grandkids around. But according to her, I was born with a veil over my face, a caul. All that is the afterbirth was still over my face when I was born and had to be removed. But in her superstitious eyes, that made me a special child. I was the only one out of all the grandkids that happened to. And it is kind of uncommon. It's like 1 in 100,000 or something like that. But supposed to have all kinds of gifts with it, like second sight and this, that, and the other, according to her. But it made me her special grandchild. And big old Victorian farmhouse that she lived in. She had a sewing room that had once been a formal dining room. And she used to get me in there, just me and her, and she'd tell me all these stories and stuff. And to tell the truth, when I was small, I was scared to death of her. She looked like a witch. She was kind of little and humped over, probably didn't weigh 90 pounds, bony, kind of gnarled hands. She had arthritis and stuff, despite all the sewing, or probably because of all the sewing that she did. But I was deathly afraid of her when I was, say, 7, 8 years old. She just scared me. And then she'd tell me all these stories, and she would make me repeat stuff back to her, especially the superstitions and stuff, so that I knew how to bring good luck and to keep away bad luck. And then if I could repeat it back to her, where she was satisfied with it, then she would reward me. She'd give me like a Hershey bar or sometime a crisp new dollar bill. And that was also to buy my silence and not to tell my other cousins about it, because they lived nearby. A couple of the families there still stayed on the farm. So yeah, that's kind of stuff I grew up around and listening to. So there's no wonder I'm strange.
Well, I know in the first book that you wrote, I believe it was one of your first books. What was it? My Strange Life? Is that
My Strange World? That was actually the third book. That's the one of my personal encounters. I'd written Strange Things in the Woods and More Strange Things in the Woods. Those are accounts gathered from family and friends of family and things like that. And I would go on shows like this, and invariably the host, or if there was an audience, somebody would ask, well, these are other people's stories. Do you have any stories? And I would trot out one or two. And I started thinking about that one day, and I thought, I've probably got enough to fill a book. And I did, and more besides. So that's My Strange World is the highlights of my own paranormal and supernatural encounters.
that is an incredible book. I mean, that book was, it sucked me in right from the beginning. And I know we beat the hell out of it the last time we talked, but it really is a great book. I actually read it again 2-3 months ago because there's one story in there that I really liked so much, and that's the one with you and your friend that saw that thing by the shed, I believe it was, or the barn.
Yeah,
great
I
story.
still have no idea what that was. I think it was some kind of shapeshifter, or possibly skinwalker or something like that. His father was full Cherokee, and I think he knew what it was, because when we came back to the house, we were, just fit to be tied. And finally, his dad's like, okay, I want you boys to shut up. I'm going to go down there and see if there's anything. Took a shotgun, went down the hill, and these people lived way back in the woods. Their driveway was over a mile long, gravel driveway. They liked their privacy. It was about halfway down there. There was an old shale pit, and the area had a working farm on it at one time, and there was some kind of shed left behind there that had fallen into disrepair, was just about to fall down. It was covered in kudzu and things, but you could still see one window hole there, which is where whatever this thing was peering out at us. First, we'd heard a noise, sounded kind of like a huffing or a grunting or something, and we looked up, and it looked like, the only thing I can describe it as is like a horse's skull with human eyeballs and human teeth, but the eyes were facing forwards instead of on the side of the head like a horse. Well, we screamed, took off up the driveway. He goes back down there, comes back maybe 20 minutes later, and just had a real solemn look on his face. We were waiting for gunshot blasts or screams or something, but never happened. And he called us over under an apple tree there. And he said, I want you boys to promise me something. And I want you to promise that you'll never go back down there and play around that area for any reason. And he was like dead serious about it. And we did. We promised. And I don't know about my friend since he lived there, but I've never been back. That's for sure. And said I thought about that years later, and I think he knew what it was and knew that it was something that the Cherokee know of. And a lot of that stuff they won't even talk about. I've been admonished by some of the elders for even mentioning the names of things, because they think that gives it power and can even draw it to you. There's certain things that they won't mention or won't even talk about. But couple weeks after that encounter, my friend came up to me at school and said, "Hey, tell you what happened this weekend." Said, "My dad pulled that old shack down into the shell pit and burned it." So there was something there that really upset his dad, but he just wouldn't talk about it. And gentleman passed away earlier this year, late last year, and I think he was like 103 years old. So
Wow.
he had a nice full life, and the skinwalker or whatever it was didn't get him anyway.
Wow, that is such a fascinating story, Steve. I mean, it's a great story, and
That's one of the few times in my life that I've truly been frightened.
yeah, because you've had some other encounters that really didn't seem to bother you too much, but that one in the book, you could tell, like when you wrote it, you were terrified when it happened.
Yeah, that one, and I misquoted there. I looked up his obituary. He was 101
Oh,
instead of
wow.
103, but that's still a pretty good
Yeah.
pretty good run. Yeah, the thing in the ditch, I was very frightened that time, and I was alone that time. At least with whatever the thing in the shack was, I had somebody there with me that saw it and corroborated. We wrote down our accounts independently of one another, and they matched, and we each drew what we saw, and it was basically the same. But the thing in the ditch, that one, I was absolutely scared out of my mind that time. First time I saw it, I was 8 years old, and we lived on property, rural property out in West Knox County, Tennessee, and about 26 acres out there. Only about 5 or 7 of it was cleared off. We had a garden and things there, and they had chickens and stuff. The rest of it was just woods. Well, there was a ditch that bordered one side of the property, and turned out through later research, I found out that had been the old dirt road through that area, dating back to at least Revolutionary War times and during the Civil War. That was just the way you travel through there. And I'd walked up and peered down into that ditch. It was 8 or 10 feet drop off the bank down in there. Turned to walk away, and I heard something like in the leaves, like an animal or something. And I turned back around toward the ditch, and I think I even took a step or two toward it. And then whatever it was came up out of the ditch, but there wasn't anything there that I could see. But I could see the effects that it was having on the surroundings. The leaves were kicking up, the small trees were being pushed out of the way. When I moved from there at age 15, some of those trees that whatever it was bent were still bent. They stayed that way and growed like that.
Wow.
But and whatever it was fast. It was coming right at me, and I could tell it was large, even though I couldn't see anything because of how high the leaves were kicking up and how high the branches above my head were being bothered by it. So I ran crying and screaming back down the hill. I was about maybe a quarter mile from home. And I was making such a fuss that my mom actually came out on the back porch to see what all the racket was. And I thought, as far as I remember, I ran past her and went inside. I think I hid under the bed or under the couch or under some kind of furniture. And once she finally got me calmed down, and I was explaining, there's something up there. Something was after me and chased me down the hill. By that time, my dad had gotten home from work, and my brother didn't live with us at the time, but lived nearby, and he had stopped in. So they both were there, and I started telling the story to them, and they said, "Well, let's go up there and look." And I'm like, "Well, I'll point and show you where it's at, but I'm not going back up there." So they went and looked, and they could see where something big had been in the area there and had disturbed everything. And so they asked, was it a deer? Was it a bear? I'm like, no, I couldn't see it. I know what all those things looked like. Whatever it was big. I mean, I could feel the footfalls on the ground, but I couldn't see anything other than the effects it was having. So they were just like, well, stay away from there, I guess. And years later, about 7 years later, I was 15, we were getting ready to move from there. We'd bought a house in a subdivision a few miles up the road in the Cards community. And I was just kind of out walking along different places in the property, going up my old childhood haunts and stuff. There were other places that I hung out there, places that I had tree houses and forts in the woods and rock outcroppings and stuff that I like to play on. I was raised as an only, so had to kind of make my own fun. Nearest neighbor was a couple miles away. And I walked back up there, and I was just kind of reminiscing, like what that was that scared me up here when I was little. Of course, it'd only been 7 years, but ages 8 to 15, that's, a lifetime when you're a kid. So I just kind of, chuckled, turned to walk away, and I hear this familiar sound of something running in the leaves. And I turned back and looked at the ditch. I didn't go toward it this time. Same exact thing. It came up out of the ditch in roughly the same area. Leaves were flying, branches were being bent out of the way and knocked about, 7 to 8 feet up into the trees. I didn't run screaming and crying that time, but I didn't waste any time getting out of there. And we moved away a couple months later, and I haven't been back since. But flash forward, I was probably 21 or 22 by now, so it would have been 5, 6, 7 years. I was working in West Knoxville at a restaurant, and a guy that I knew just from work and didn't really even know him from work, but he's like, they were going to a party after work. And he said, "Hey, won't you come along?" I was like, "Yeah, okay." So went to this party, didn't know anybody there except the guy I was with. I didn't really even know him. I'd never told him this story or anything. There was, maybe 20 people there. Well, some of the girls that were there found a Ouija board behind the couch or under the host's couch, and they got it out and started messing with it. And they started going around the room, and everybody would have to ask the Ouija board a question. When they got to me, I thought, I've got a good one for you. And all I said was, what scared me as a child? And that was it. No more, no backstory, no information, nothing. And I'll never forget watching this happen. The Ouija board spelled out WATERSPRITE, water sprite. They looked at me, and I shrugged my shoulders. I don't know. And they were laughing and saying, well, maybe it's thirsty. Maybe it wants a drink. Whatever. And they went to somebody else. But the next day, I went to the library in Oak Ridge. This was before the days of the internet. And went to the reference desk. I said, what can you tell me about a water sprite or a water spirit? And, excuse me, about 15 minutes or so later, the reference librarian brings over a big stack of books. And there was I'm not sure if it was an elemental or just some type of a fairy type creature, but there was a naiad, N-Y-A-D or N-A-I-A-D, and it's from the Greek. It means to flow, and it's one of the nymphs of flowing water, and is often spotted around springs, rivers, fountains, and lakes. Well, the unusual thing about that property, there were 7 natural springs on it in different locations that flowed out of the hillside into a bigger creek, and that went down to the lake, which was about 200 yards away. So perfect spot for a water spirit, a naiad. But pictures of them, from mythology and stuff, they're all wispy and gossamer wings and all this stuff. Whatever got after me was huge.
Real big. Because if it's bending tree branches and stuff, it's big.
Yeah. And, that's the only thing that makes sense based on what people that didn't know anything about the story consulting a Ouija board got from it. So and then there's other types of those similar beings, elementals or whatever they are. There's also dryad, which is spirit of the forest. But the board said a water sprite and not a tree spirit or anything. So can't prove it by me, but I think that's what it was a naiad. Why? It chased me away from there and didn't bother anybody else. Like my dad, my brother went up there, didn't have any problems. When the neighbor kid, like I said, the nearest neighbor was a couple miles away, when he came over to visit one day, I sort of used him as bait. I sent him up there, and I stayed down the hill, hid behind a tree where I could watch him. Now, this was when I was 8. And I said, walk up there and look down in the ditch and tell me what you see. And he did. He walked up there and looked, and he's like, I don't see anything. What am I supposed to see? And I'm like, just stay there for a little while. Keep walking around. He did nothing. So obviously, whatever it was just attuned to me and didn't want me in there.
I think a lot of paranormal instances are a spiritual thing. I think that they're meant, a lot of them, not all of them, are meant for certain people. I think that's why, like, say you and I are standing there somewhere and, you know, you have an encounter and yet I don't see it, because that happens quite a bit. I think that certain people are just either tuned in or those events are meant for those people only.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that my granny taught me. That was almost her exact words that I told her about the apparition that I saw when I was 5 going on 6. Car came down the hill, stopped at a T intersection there, and I see this little kid run out from behind the car, runs across in front of the car like at an angle, and the driver is not paying any attention. And I'm thinking, that kid's going to get hit. Well, the kid runs at an angle, across the road, down into our yard, and if you've ever watched like a really small child that's just a toddler that's barely mastered the art of walking, sometimes they'll start running too fast and they don't really know what to do, so they just fall down. And that's what this kid did. He ran down into the yard. He fell down. The minute he fell, hit the ground, he was gone. I mean, he absolutely ceased to exist. Could still see what he was wearing. He had little blue shorts, white shirt, suspenders, little matching blue cap, white shoes. But he was just gone. I was halfway between the house and the road, and I measured the driveway later on for another reason, but it was 212 feet. So when this happened, I was about 100 feet from the road. Didn't take my eyes off the spot, kept walking right toward where he disappeared. I expected to find, you know, a hole with a kid in it or something that I'd mistaken for a kid, but I knew better than that. You know, there was no holes there. I knew every inch of that yard because that was part of the cleared off part. Nothing there. Even one day I went and got a shovel and dug in the spot to see if there was anything in the ground there. Never found anything. And then a few years later, I was talking to my grandma about spooky stuff like that. And I mentioned that one to her, and she just, you know, listened very intently, kind of nodded her head. And she said, there'll be things you see sometimes that other people won't see. There's things that are meant for you. There's things that are meant for other people that you may be a witness to. He said, so don't worry if you see something that doesn't make sense. It either will later or maybe never, but you were meant to see it for whatever reason. So, you know, I've held that as one of my personal truths because I've had all kinds of things happen to me. And I think it's just me. I think I'm like it's like moss to a flame. When I go into a place, I was thinking about that a few years ago. I've never lived in a house that at least wasn't partially haunted, but I don't think it's the house so much as it's me that's haunted.
Yeah.
Because some of the houses I've lived in where I experienced things on a regular, semi-regular basis, other people lived there and didn't see or hear anything necessarily.
That's wild, isn't it? How that works out.
Yeah.
I wish someone would do, I don't, maybe there is someone that's doing research on the fact that people like you that have an extraordinary amount of experiences and someone who maybe says they don't have any. I think that's it would be, first of all, a weird experiment because I think there's people out there that have had experiences and don't even know they've had experiences.
Yeah, I agree. I think people have seen things and didn't know they were seeing something that didn't exist or that wasn't there or time slip or glitch or whatever you want to call it. And then I've also talked to people that claim they've never had an experience. And then there'll be a little postscript to that, but there was this one time.
Yeah.
But I don't believe in stuff like that. But this happened, you know, so it's like, okay. So it's hard to tell. It's such a personal thing and based on what you believe and how you perceive things as to whether, you know, it was an encounter or not, or some people just, you know, kind of shrug and say, well, there's no explanation for it. I couldn't have seen what I saw because it didn't exist. So there you go. You've already made up your mind and closed it, and there's your answer.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, hey, let's talk about this newest book, man. It's, tell me a little bit about it because this one's the Pacific Northwest, right?
Yeah, it's got Oregon, Washington, and Idaho in it. and a lot of disappearances out here, particularly in places in Washington State. Mount Rainier, most famously, has had a lot of disappearances. Um, on Mount St. Helens, which in Washington State, a lot of Bigfoot sightings there, missing people there. Of course, that blew its top in it was 1980, 1981, sometime around. And where I live in St. Helens, Oregon, and this town is named because you can see Mount St. Helens in Washington in the distance from here. But yeah, I can see the backside of the caldera there, where what's left of it, and they're thinking that it may blow again someday. Wow. But I've talked to people that lived here, and they said, yeah, it was kind of a mess. That it was couldn't see the sun for several days, maybe a couple of weeks. There was ash all over everything, but it wasn't too bad here. Now there's people on the mountain that lost their lives and stuff. Even one theory that it wiped out all the Bigfoot that lived up there. If you've ever heard of the Ape Canyon encounter, where back in the early 1900s, the group of miners had an encounter, or a group of Bigfoot trapped them in their cabin and were throwing boulders on top of it. And one of them claimed famously to have shot one of them. That's on Mount St. Helens, just in the foothills of it.
Yeah, that's a great story, by the way. That story is really, really crazy.
Yeah, they didn't have any idea of Sasquatch or Yeti, although the Native Americans here did. But those miners, they thought it was some sort of ape men, or that's how it got the name Ape Canyon. And there's ape caves there too. These beings supposedly lived in caves there. But yeah, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but he wrote a book called I Battled the Ape Men on Mount St. Helens, or something like that. So
they actually, when they decided to make a run for it, they left all their gear too, and they never did go back, did they?
No, that right there tells you. I mean, these were hard scrabble gold miners, out in the woods for weeks, months at a time, living in a cabin, no amenities or creature comforts or anything. For them to take off and leave everything behind, that's really saying something.
Yeah, because it would translate into, I think it was thousands of dollars worth of equipment back then. I don't even know what that translates to today's terms.
Yeah, it'd probably be six figures.
Yeah, that's a great story. It really is. So I know there are tons and tons of disappearances, weird disappearances, and I've been putting some similarities together with like alien abductions and things like that. And I know like a lot of those similarities are, Germanic descent or Celtic descent is a big one for the alien abductions. What is it for the disappearances? Because I know you've done some digging into that as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it's kind of the same. The people that go missing tend to be of Germanic descent. They tend to be either on just at the beginning of the autism spectrum, or very, very intelligent, like PhD rocket scientist level.
There's a fine line between those two too that I don't think a lot of people don't know.
I think that loops around in the back and you don't really think about it. But I agree. I've known people that were so smart they were literally autistic, because they would be so focused on what they were doing, what they were thinking, that they would, forget to eat or bathe or interact with other people or anything. So it kind of does tie together there. But people wearing red tend to go missing.
That is one of the most bizarre things, isn't it?
Yeah, and you would think that'd be just the opposite. You'd think somebody wearing red would be easy to find, easy to spot. But no, has berry fields, either people picking berries or near berry fields. There's missing people. That kind of ties back into the Fae theory. Those berry patches, that was not only a source of Fae food, but inside those brambles was where they held their celebrations, their dancing and drinking, and also their mating. So you're kind of blocking the Fae from getting their groove on if you're in the berry patch. And another thing, boulder fields. A lot of people go missing or are found in or near a boulder field. And the curious thing about that, some of the ones that have been found in boulder fields, it was an area that had been previously searched. And, a boulder field, it's not going to be hard to spot a body.
Yeah.
But yeah, you wouldn't think you would miss a body in a boulder field if you'd searched there. Well, there's been cases where on maybe the second or third search, here's the person deceased in a boulder field, but it looks like they'd fallen from a considerable height when there was no height for them to fall from. Well, there's a couple of different schools of thought on that. There's alien abduction thing. That there are other people that look like they merely went up. I know people described, I think it was on Rainier, and one of the park rangers said, I don't know where he went. He either went in the mountain or he went up, but he's not on the mountain. And the Algonquin Native Americans have a legend in the New England states about a creature that looks like a rock, but it's able to open up and swallow people. And then when it's done with whatever it does with you, then it spits you back out. Well, you think about that. If there was something in a boulder field that wasn't actually a boulder, but just cleverly looked like one, camouflaged as one, boulder opened up, you fell in it, it closed up, and whatever it would spit you back out, you might look like you'd fallen from a considerable distance. The same story with the Algonquins. I've got some stories from missing people that were found there that looked like they had been crushed or squeezed to death, just laying out in the woods. So, was it one of these rock creatures? Was it a Bigfoot? Was somebody went through a portal and it messed them up when they came back through? I mean, there's just so many different ways to go with it.
These boulder fields, what kind of stone are these boulders made out of?
It tends to be granite. And another thing, if you look at the missing clusters of people, and most of it's on both coasts, and then not that much right down the middle, except for up north. If you overlay that with areas where there's caves and cavern systems, it matches up. So there's something to do with the rocks and the rock formations there. Like, say, for example, Tennessee, North Carolina, that area, a lot of disappearances in the Smokies, the Shenandoahs, and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Well, there's also one of the largest underground cave systems in the United States is in that area.
The Mammoth Cave.
Mammoth Cave in Kentucky is a part of. And then if you look into the stuff like they're talking about on Hellier or Pennyroyal podcast, it's in that area. There's some sort of anomaly there. There's a magnetic anomaly that's known in Kentucky that's one of the strongest in the world. So lots of weird stuff going on there. So is it whatever this magnetic thing is that's causing people to see things and hear things, or is that part of something else?
Yeah, it's strange. I know I've heard recently a lot more tales of, they're generically calling it the predator thing, which I dislike. I don't know why I dislike it so much, Steve, but I really hate when they call it the predator thing because...
Yeah, I've reported on some stories of that. I've got a couple on missing persons and mysteries. People over there refer to it as the Glimmer Man.
Yeah.
And I saw something like that out here in downtown Portland a few years ago, real late at night. I'd been to an event at Powell's Bookstore, which is like the largest independent bookstore in the world. It takes up a couple city blocks. It's 5 stories tall. They have over 1 million books on the shelves. They hand you a map when you walk in so you can find your way around. I'd been to something there. I was trying to get back home. I was living in southeast Portland at the time. And I'd missed the last bus, so I had to wait for the orange line. They have a night train that runs down there. So I was waiting for the orange train that would take me to where I could catch a bus that would get me home. Well, I'm standing there. It's like 20 minutes before the train arrives. And I'm just kind of pacing up and down the sidewalk in front of these closed stores. And I noticed something over by the street corner there between a signpost and like one of these permanent garbage cans where it's fitted into the ground and they just come along and empty the can from inside it. There was something kind of shimmery there. And this was warm weather, and I thought, well, is that steam coming out of there? What is that? And I walked over a little closer to it, and I could see that it had like a humanoid shape, but it wasn't very tall. It was maybe 4 feet tall or so. And when I got a little closer to the garbage can, whatever it was, it squatted down like it didn't want me to see it, or it thought I might have seen it or something. And like every hair on my body stood up. And I thought, well, I don't want to run because, there's nobody around here. I was the only one at the train station. And if I run, the thing's probably going to try to catch me. So I just got ambled around, excuse me, and stood there at the corner. And then when the light changed, I went against the light, ran out into traffic, and used that as my excuse to break into a run. There were people honking their horns at me and stuff. And I just continued on up the street, probably about 5 or 6 blocks to where the next train station was, and there was people at that one. So whatever it was, I never saw it again, but I haven't spent a lot of time in downtown Portland late at night either, and I wouldn't. If I in that situation now, I'd take an Uber or something home. There's been a lot of encounters with it. A lot of people report that it makes a clicking noise, like almost an insectoid type thing.
Yeah.
So UFO researcher Bruce Maccabee, his wife had a sighting of it, even took a picture of it. It's made like a little flip phone, so it's not a very good picture, but she was sitting in a tree stand. She was a bow hunter, and she saw something in an adjacent tree and snapped a picture of it. And that's kind of what she described it as. It had a form, it had a shape, but you could see through it. She says, like looking through saran wrap, or like seeing the heat rising off the road in the summertime.
Did that one happen in Ohio?
Yeah, I think so.
I think so too. It had because there's a big UFO sighting. I remember this. And
it was adjacent. She was like behind the high school. Well, on the other side of the high school, where I think the band or something was practicing.
A football game. There was a football game.
Yeah, they had a UFO sighting while she's, farther back in the woods in a tree stand. Same time.
I remember reading about that like the day after it happened.
Yeah.
Wow, that's crazy.
And I think that happens a lot of times. A lot of times the UFO and Bigfoot sightings will go kind of hand in hand. Usually where there's a prevalence of one, you'll have the other as well.
It's really bizarre how all these things kind of work together or fit together, or they're spotted together. It's just really, really a strange thing.
Like they all know each other, but they're all just doing their own thing or have their own individual assignments or whatever.
Yeah, it's crazy because, like when I talk to Stan Gordon, he talks about how many UFO encounters that he's had with Bigfoot, like Bigfoot and UFO together. Like it's just a strange thing. You wouldn't think those two are together. And going back to what you said way earlier in the show about, a little bit of I don't know, friction between the two camps there.
Yeah.
Because if you say that around a Bigfoot researcher, they get mad, they get pissed, and it's weird.
Yeah.
And I don't think the UFO researchers so much. I don't think it bothers them so much, but it's the Bigfoot guys, the flesh and blood Bigfoot guys, that it really pisses off, and I don't know why.
It used to be like the fighting in the UFO community was infighting amongst themselves, and there's some of that in the Bigfoot community too. But yeah, if you get the two communities together, they do clash, and the Bigfoot guys do get really upset if you try to insinuate that there's anything to do with UFOs. And I've even heard them say, well, it can't be UFOs because they don't exist. Like, dude, you're talking about Bigfoot, okay? Bigfoot exists. UFOs can exist too, and fairies and Glimmer Man and whatever else you can throw in there.
Yeah, anything. I mean, I think that, if they would actually work together and come up and listen to each other's ideas, maybe we could get more accomplished. But like we said earlier, what fun is that if we figure it out,
Yeah, well, that difference of opinion is good as long as, they don't take it too far. And I mean, I've seen it almost come to fistfights and stuff like that. I think that's a little extreme, but sometimes just have to agree to disagree and find the points that you do agree on and then go from there. But getting back to the Glimmer Man thing, there's a book called Cameleo by Robert Guffey. Have you ever read that?
No, I'm going to pick it up, though.
He talks about this person that he met, disenfranchised person, homeless, drug addicted, that was having invisible things come into his apartment to bother him. So he's like, at first, okay, it's just another drug addict. But the more he looked into it, the more he found that this guy seemed to be telling the truth. But what Robert Guffey found out was that it somehow was connected with military research. And I mean, if you think about that, if you're using some sort of cloaking device that can hide a person, number one, the smaller the person, because these beings this guy saw, again, like 3 or 4 feet tall, well, it would use less energy or less of the device or ever how it works. Smaller the person, the less, you would need to cover. And as far as it bothering people, who better than somebody that had previously been homeless, somebody that had drug issues, perhaps even mental issues, because nobody's going to believe them. And that was kind of what Robert Guffey was leaning toward in this book, that it was some sort of government, ours or somebody's, that was messing with this guy, testing this technology.
That's weird to think about. It really is. And I wouldn't put it past them at all to do anything like that, Steve. I really wouldn't.
Tuskegee experiments.
Yeah.
CIA, MK Ultra, giving people LSD, all kinds of different things. Yeah, there's a lot of testing and experimenting that's been done on people that never even realized it, and who knows what else. So I agree. I wouldn't put anything past some of the powers that be.
I just spoke a couple of weeks ago with Ryan Fusco. Have you ever heard of him?
The name sounds familiar, but I can't speak of the researcher.
He's an up and coming UFO cryptozoology researcher. Pretty young guy, great energy, really good investigator. He researched a case in Oklahoma that was crazy. And the way that this ties in is he was seeing these things and he thinks they followed him home. That's a different story, but he was seeing these things and he would watch them put these goggles on and then couldn't, I guess they had to wear these goggles because they wouldn't be able to see anything if they were completely cloaked. So they have to wear goggles to be able to cloak. But again, it goes back to these things being short and small. And, it's really a crazy thing,
Yeah.
He said he had these things follow him home and they come in his house all the time. And he has recordings and he's got all kinds of photographic evidence. And he said sometimes that photographic evidence just disappears off his phone.
Yeah, I've heard of that happening, that memory cards erased or photos that they had, taped under a dresser drawer or something and they're gone. What'd you say the gentleman's name was?
Ryan Fusco.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got some super interesting stories. I mean, it's really crazy stuff that he's got, and he's actually putting this together where he thinks that a lot of these things that are cloaked, these beings or whatever they are, people are actually confusing them with spirits and ghosts. And a lot of activity that's going on in his house, he says, are these things. But if he didn't know that they were these things, he would think it was a ghost. His house was haunted.
Yeah,
but
that makes sense.
That Oklahoma incident was crazy. He said these things they were going through his car at one point. They had a whole load of what it looked like teenagers. These creatures were like teenagers, and it was almost like they were there on a field trip looking through his car and things. It was the strangest thing. And there were like people that appeared to be like these teachers, and it was just a bizarre story.
I love stuff like that, the truly bizarre things like that. Like one of my favorite stories, like from Skinwalker Ranch, is where the lady was standing in her kitchen doing the dishes, looking out the window. She saw what looked like a portal open up. There's a man sitting at a desk, like typing on a typewriter. He looks up and sees her watching him. He kind of makes a face and does something, and then the portal closes back. It's like,
yeah, it's wild, isn't it?
It's just so strange. But you would enjoy Guffey's book, Cameleo.
I'm going to check it out for sure. That story, that's kind of like Ryan said at one point, he was looking up in this, he's seen this, like, it was almost like what he called was a movie projector or a projection screen, which if you think about it, it could have been a portal that opened up. But he said that he saw this adult and this kid not human, sitting on a couch, and it was almost like they were watching TV, like watching him on a TV. Like it was like really weird, like it was a stage, you know? And he said, but the thing that he was most fascinated about was what was on their walls behind them and what was in their room and things like that. He said it didn't bother him that they were looking at him. He was trying to take everything in that he was seeing around them, like things that he'd never seen before. It's just, his story is really interesting. It really is.
Kind of put you in that theory. Mine was a theory that like that where sea monkeys or an alien ant farm or something, you know. That they're colonized us and they're watching us.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many theories out there, and I think that there are pieces of each theory that fit, you know, like together. And I think that if somehow we could, it's like a puzzle, right, Steve? Like if we could piece those little parts together from each of these theories, I think that we may be able to come up with like the right picture, you know?
Yeah. Soraya Ascath, he has a show called Where Does the Road Go? Where did the road go? And he's used that puzzle analogy before. He said it's like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but you don't have the box, so you don't know what it's supposed to look like. And then turns out maybe there's 4 or 5 puzzles all mixed together, so you don't even know which one you're trying to put together.
Yeah,
I like that analogy.
It is a good one. It really is a good one. But yeah, man, there are so many stories. What's happening next for you, Steve? What are you writing about next?
Well, I've got a book of ghost stories, just pure ghost stories that I'm working on.
Awesome.
Also working on a book with a co-author about the missing and murdered indigenous women in particular. There's children and men that are missing too. That's an epidemic that's going on that most people don't even know about. We've started a series on the YouTube channel called Spirited Away, which looks into the No More Stolen Sisters movement, where somebody is taking these indigenous Native American women and don't know if they're being trafficked, if they're being murdered, both the above. But that's something that bears looking into. So we're going in that direction. It's always got new videos coming out all the time. I just did released another Joshua Tree video over there last week. Go have a listen to that. It's some strange experiences and encounters in Joshua Tree. I just recorded one about Crater Lake. I don't think that one's come out yet. That's here in Oregon. A lot of weird stuff down there. And then in March, I'm going to be speaking at UFOCon 2022 in San Francisco. And it's my first time at a UFO conference. And I'm kind of tying together what we were talking about earlier, how missing people and UFO abductions, there's some overlap. There's some strange coincidences, especially people with missing time or people like Bill that seem to have encountered something, what other people are describing as grays that they've encountered. So having a lot of fun putting that presentation together. That'll be, I don't know what day I'm speaking yet, but that's the 25th, 26th, and 27th of March in San Francisco.
That'll be awesome, man. That's one of my favorite rabbit holes right there. That whole theory, I mean, it just makes so much sense. It makes so much more sense than a lot of the other theories that are out there. It's almost frightening how much sense that the fairy and the fae folk theory.
Yeah, it does. Just, sometimes I'm almost embarrassed to admit that. People are like, fairies, come on. Like, well, you're talking about Bigfoot and little gray men, so I don't see that big a stretch because both of those have been described in the fairy realm hundreds of years ago, if not thousands of years ago.
Yeah, it's really that. I mean, that theory blows my mind. It really does because it's on point, Steve. It really is on point.
We've made some videos about that for the channel. I think we're up to the missing and the faith theory. I think part 3, and I've got part 4 and 5 ready. I just haven't recorded it yet.
Awesome.
But that's one of my favorites to delve into as well, because everything just fits. It just fits so perfectly. If you can get beyond and I think a lot of the problem with it, anything you mention a fairy, that's all been Disney-fied.
Yep.
As I like to call it, where it's, it's Tinkerbell, or it's a cute little, like I said, a little thing with gossamer wings flitting around and granting wishes. some of those fairies are hardcore. They will mess you up. They will kill you. They will steal your baby. You know, that sort of thing. If you look back into the legends, and like I said, the Celts, it was almost a religion for them. They believed heavily in it. Still pockets of that where they still do.
Yep.
Same with some of your Scandinavian countries. They believe in trolls and gnomes. And read about one place where instead of blasting this rock out of the way to build a highway, they built the highway around the rock because they didn't want to anger the trolls that lived in the rocks.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it?
And this is, modern day. This in 1800s, where this is something recently. So I think there's something to all that, Ken.
I think you're right, man. So I urge everybody that's listening to the show to hop on over to Steve's channels and check him out, because he puts out some incredible content, and I'm a huge fan of it, Steve. I'm not going to lie. I hang on every episode. So
I appreciate that. I have a lot of fun doing it, and just never know what's going to be next. And, a lot of those cases are sad. The people that are missing and that are never found or found deceased. We treat that with reverence and respect. And through it all, if we can bring one person home or give one family closure, that's what it's all about, really. Because these are just sad, sad cases. But I would still love to know what's behind some of these disappearances.
yeah, because they are really super strange. I mean, the ones that get me, Steve, are the ones that are found in such mysterious ways. Like, they're found without shoes, or their shoes are found, or they're found in trees. How do you find somebody up 12 foot up in a tree,
Yeah, or find their clothing up in the tree or scattered about, or find the clothing where it's all put together still, but there's nobody in it. Like the shoes are in the socks go into the pants, the shirt goes into the pants, but it's just like they melted out of their clothes or vaporized.
It is bizarre. And there are just so many weird, when they're found, there's so many weird points when they're found that it's really a creepy thing. So I don't even know what to think. I don't
urge everybody, if you go hiking, go with a group, or at least let somebody know where you're going when you plan to be back. Take extra supplies, especially water. Invest in a personal locator beacon. They've come way down in price now. I think on the low end on Amazon, they're about $100. What that does, you can trigger that. It sends a signal up to the satellite that alerts search and rescue teams, and they can pinpoint you depending on the model and how good it is. They can triangulate and find you, some of them to within 3 feet, some of them within a few yards. So there's things you can do to not go missing. And if you do go missing, there's things you can do to make sure that you're rescued. And I told somebody the other day, if I ever go missing in the woods, I'm going to build the biggest fire they've ever seen. I would rather be charged with arson than to be squirrel food.
Sure. Squirrels are probably the least of your worries too.
Yeah.
I know they're making those beacons in watches now too, because my brother-in-law has one of those watches, and he can actually activate. It's not cheap, but he can actually activate that, and we can, when he's out hiking, we can actually track him with an app on our phone.
Yeah, they've got some of the high-end ones now. You can even text.
Yeah, he can do that too. Yep.
And also do the satellite call thing. But I think the airtime is about $25 a minute. But who cares if it's saving your life?
Yeah. I know when he did the where did he go in John Muir Trail? Does that sound right? I believe
in California.
Yeah, he had his watch. I believe he bought that right before that. And it was crazy because he went into the woods right before those last big wildfires happened. And they were like on his heel the whole time, those wildfires. He was just, maybe 100 miles from them all. He stayed on pace ahead of them, just so he could, get out, because he had no clue that was going to happen. And it was a crazy experience for him, but he called us at one point, and it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that John Muir Trail, that's up in the Sierra Nevadas there. It goes through Yosemite, Kings Canyon, and Sequoia National Parks, I think. So that's a lot of people go missing in that area. So yeah, I would recommend definitely taking something like that with you. I don't think I've ever heard of anybody that went missing that didn't survive that had one of those and some sort of weapon is recommended. I think, check your local laws and regulations, but I think you can carry in every national park now. Not sure that, like I said, check your local laws. But there's been plenty of people with weapons that were never found. They found, like the gun with the barrel bent or something like that. And there's been a few people that had those personal locator beacons that have never been found. But you have to be able to trigger the beacon, is the main thing in that. There was another guy that I heard about that had fell into a crevice, and they just happened to find him because they flew directly over where the crevice was and was able to get to the signal for the beacon, or I guess the satellite passed over or whatever. But he almost didn't make it because of where he was at, down in a rock crevice, and just a few inches width there for the signal to get up out of there.
Wow, that's insane. He got lucky.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Steve, let's hit your links one more time for everybody and where people can purchase your books and find your YouTube and everything like that.
Oh, absolutely. The books are on Amazon and wherever fine books are sold. My publisher likes for me to say that. Paperback, Kindle. I've got audio versions coming up. Did the first one, Strange Things in the Woods. My publisher didn't know that I had a YouTube channel, was a narrator and all that. And I've got so much stink over that. People are like, that's not you. We want to hear you. So I'm going to be re-recording that one myself. And then the subsequent ones, I'm going to be doing the audio versions myself. That'll make some people happy. YouTube channel, Missing Persons and Mysteries. And then I have like a personal channel called 13 Past Midnight. I just play around over there, tell ghost stories, and some of my encounters from Strange Things My Strange World, I've narrated and put over there too. That's 13 Past Midnight. But Missing Persons and Mysteries is the main channel. We just passed 168,000 subscribers, so that one's doing really, really well in just a couple of years' time.
Awesome.
Find me on Facebook, Steve Stockton 81. And you can email me, stevestockton81@gmail.com. That's my name, and the number is 81@gmail.com. I'm on Twitter at Strange and Odd.
Awesome. Great. Good deal. I really appreciate you coming on, taking time to talk with me, man. It's always a pleasure, and I know my audience loves you. I had death threat emails, so have you back on, because they're like, where's Steve? We want Steve back on. And I'm like, okay, all right, let's do it. So I really do appreciate you coming back on, man.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Ken. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that about does it for Dreamland tonight, dreamers. Thanks again for listening, and good night.